Get him away from my car. The billionaire didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The rain came down hard that evening, not the kind that cools the air, the kind that soaks through everything and reminds you of what you don't have. Daniel stood on the wet pavement outside the Grand Mercer Hotel, his thin hoodie plastered to his frame, his bare feet cold against the concrete. He had been standing there for 10 minutes. He had gone over what he would say 100 times. He was not begging. He was not there for money. He just needed 1 minute. 1 minute to ask a simple question. Is he okay? That was all. Inside the glass revolving doors, warm light spilled across marble floors. Uniformed staff moved with purpose. Guests in dry, pressed clothes passed through without a second glance at the boy outside. Then the black car pulled up. Junho Kang stepped out before his driver could open the door fully. He was tall, controlled in every movement, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. He had the kind of face that had stopped registering ordinary things, the kind of face that had been shielded from inconvenience for so long that inconvenience had started to look like disrespect. Daniel stepped forward. He only got 2 steps before a hand landed on his chest. Back up. I just need to talk to him, Daniel said. Please, I just need to know if his son is okay. Junho didn't raise his voice. He never had to. He said 4 words the way a man says 4 words when the world has never once made him repeat himself. Get him away from my car. 2 security guards stepped forward immediately, grabbing the boy by the arms. Guests under the hotel awning stared. Some looked uncomfortable, most looked amused. The boy was barefoot, soaked, a thin hoodie clinging to his frame. I'm not begging, he shouted. I just need to talk to you. Junho Kang didn't even look at him. He adjusted his cufflinks. Do not let him touch me, he said calmly. A few people laughed softly. One woman whispered to her companion, "These street kids are everywhere." She said it with the tired tone of someone commenting on pigeons. The boy struggled as security pushed him backward into the rain. I saved him, he yelled. Your son. A guard shoved him harder. Enough. Junho finally turned slightly, not with concern, with irritation, the brief flicker of a man whose evening has been interrupted. Give him something and send him away. I don't want money, the boy shouted. But the revolving doors had already swallowed the billionaire whole. The lobby lights dimmed behind the glass, and Daniel stumbled backward onto the wet curb. The guards returned to their posts without another word. The crowd under the awning had already moved on. Within seconds, the boy ceased to exist to any of them. He sat down on the pavement. Rain hit the back of his neck. His arm was still bandaged from earlier, a strip of gauze he had wrapped himself using a first aid kit he found in a gas station bathroom. The cut wasn't deep enough to need stitches. He had decided that on his own. He sat there long enough to get cold. Then he stood up and started walking. He didn't know where else to go. He had spent the last 3 hours at the hospital waiting room, too afraid to ask the nurses directly, too aware of how he looked. Eventually, a security guard had told him to leave. He'd followed the family's name in the hotel registry that a maintenance worker had mentioned near the service entrance without meaning to. And now he had been turned away from there too. He just wanted to know if the kid was alive. That was all he had ever wanted. 3 hours earlier. The crash happened at 2:17 p.m. on a stretch of road that didn't look like anywhere anything important should happen. A black SUV ran a red light at full speed. Metal folded. Glass exploded. The Kang family car spun twice before slamming into a light pole hard enough to buckle it at the base. Drivers froze. Pedestrians screamed. A man in a delivery uniform stopped dead on the sidewalk, phone already in hand, unsure whether to film or call. 2 women backed away from the curb. A cyclist dismounted and stood there, both feet on the ground, staring. No one moved toward the car. except one boy, 12 years old, thin, hoodie still damp from the earlier drizzle. Daniel had been crossing the street when the impact happened. The shockwave of sound hit him before the image made sense. A deep metallic crack, then the cascade of glass, then the hiss of something starting to burn beneath the hood. He saw the smoke first, then the flames. Then through the shattered rear window he saw movement, small, a child's hand, pressing weakly against the inside of the door. He ran. The heat hit his face the moment he got close. He coughed and kept moving. He grabbed the rear door handle, locked. He tried again, still locked. The flames were crawling now, moving from the engine bay toward the cab, fingers of orange dragging across the crumpled hood. He looked around, found a rock on the curb, raised it, swung. The window didn't break on the first hit, or the second. On the third strike the glass gave way, folding inward in a sheet. Daniel reached in without hesitating. His forearm caught the edge of a shard and he felt the slice of it, sharp, clean, immediate. But his hand was already on the seatbelt buckle. The child inside was unconscious, maybe 8 years old, head tilted sideways, lips slightly parted. Daniel got the buckle undone, got his arms under the boy's frame and pulled. The weight was more than he expected. He stumbled back a step. His feet caught on broken glass. He pulled again. The engine ignited with a sound like a door slamming in a closed room. The explosion was not massive, not cinematic, but the force of it pushed everyone nearby back a half step. Daniel had already cleared the vehicle. He dropped to the ground over the unconscious child, putting his own back between the boy and the blast. When he looked up, the car was fully burning. He could hear sirens, distant but getting closer. He stayed on the ground beside the child, watching the boy's chest, counting breaths. The boy was breathing, shallow, unsteady, but breathing. "Keep breathing," Daniel said quietly. He said it the way he used to talk to his mother in the hospital, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, like saying it made it more likely to be true. The paramedics arrived and pushed through the gathering crowd. Daniel stepped back. Someone tried to ask him something. He shook his head. He didn't want to explain anything. He didn't want a camera in his face. He was tired and his arm was bleeding and the adrenaline was starting to drain out of him all at once, leaving him hollow and shaking. He pulled his hoodie sleeve down over the wound and walked away through the crowd, while everyone else was still looking at the burning car. No name given, no statement, no reward asked for. He just disappeared into the city the same way he appeared in it, quietly, like he was used to taking up as little space as possible. Inside the hotel suite on the 14th floor, the room smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. Minyu Kang lay in the center of the bed, small against the white sheets, his left arm wrapped in light gauze. The bruising around his collarbone was already darkening to purple. His breathing was steady. His eyes were closed. The doctors had just left. Junho Kang sat in the chair beside the bed. His jacket was folded over the armrest. His phone was face down on the side table. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was not thinking about contracts, not competitors, not the quarterly review or the expansion deal or the analyst call scheduled for Thursday morning. He was thinking about a seat belt. Specifically about whether Minyu had been wearing it properly, whether the driver had checked before pulling out of the garage, whether he himself had been inside or outside the car, whether the margin between one outcome and the other could be measured in seconds. His lead doctor cleared his throat from the doorway. "There's something else," the doctor said carefully. Junho looked up. If a young boy hadn't acted when he did, and as quickly as he did, your son wouldn't be here. Fire services confirmed it. The rear compartment was fully engulfed within 90 seconds of the impact. He was pulled out before that window closed. Junho frowned. "What boy?" "We don't have a name. He was gone before the paramedics could get his information. But there's crash site footage. The responding officer sent it over as a matter of protocol. Chen, Junho's driver, stepped forward and placed a tablet on the table. The footage was from a traffic camera mounted on the opposite corner. High angle, slightly washed out, the timestamp burning white in the top left corner. Junho leaned forward. Smoke, chaos, people backing away from the wreck. Then a slight figure moving against the current, moving toward the fire when everyone else was moving away. He watched the boy try the door. Fail. Pick up the rock. Swing it twice before the glass gave. Watched him reach inside without hesitation. Watched the sleeve of the hoodie catch on something at the window frame and the boy pull free without stopping. Then the flash of the engine igniting. The boy dropping to the ground, shielding Minyu with his own body. Junho watched the whole sequence twice without saying a word. The second time he noticed the bandaging. After the paramedics arrived, just before the boy disappeared into the crowd, he had pulled his sleeve down over something on his forearm. The movement was practiced, deliberate, the kind of movement someone makes when they're used to handling things themselves. Junho set the tablet down. Find him. Chen hesitated. Sir, there was actually a boy outside earlier, before you came in. He said he needed to speak with you. Security removed him. He was. Describe him. Thin, about 12, hoodie, barefoot, I think. The silence in the room changed texture. Junho stood up. He didn't reach for his jacket. He didn't check his phone. He crossed the room and went directly to the door. How long ago? 20 minutes, maybe. Junho's jaw tightened, not with the irritation it had held downstairs, with something else. Something that had no place in his vocabulary yet but was making room for itself regardless. Find him now. Security teams spread across 4 city blocks. Chen coordinated from the lobby. 2 guards went north toward the transit station. 2 went south along the main drag. Junho himself stepped outside. He stood in the rain without asking for an umbrella. A photographer across the street raised a lens and lowered it again. The expression on Junho's face was not one that invited documentation. He walked. He didn't know the streets the way Daniel knew them, but he moved through them now with his eyes open in a way they hadn't been in years. He looked at the spaces between buildings, the overhangs, the alcoves. 3 hours ago, a 12-year-old boy with a cut arm and no shoes had run into a burning car for his son, and Junho had sent him away without looking at his face. He kept walking. They found him 20 minutes later, under the Millbrook overpass, 2 blocks east of the hotel. He was sitting on a concrete ledge with a half-eaten sandwich, tearing pieces off and laying them on the ground beside him. A stray dog, brown, medium-sized, one ear bent forward, was eating from the small pile. Daniel watched the dog eat with the steady, focused attention of someone who has very little to do and knows how to be still. Security signaled Junho. He waved them back and approached alone. The boy stood when he heard footsteps, cautious, shoulders squared, not aggressive, just ready. Junho stopped a few feet away. You, he said quietly. Daniel looked at him without flinching. I wasn't trying to bother you. I just wanted to know if he was okay. Junho's voice came out different than it had downstairs. Lower, more careful. You pulled my son from the car. Daniel gave a small shrug. He was inside. You could have died. So could he. Simple, no performance. No pausing for effect. Just the plain logic of a boy who had made a decision and had nothing complicated to say about it. Junho looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the bandaged arm, the bare feet on wet concrete, the posture of someone who had learned to occupy the minimum required space. What's your name? Daniel. Where are your parents, Daniel? A pause, not long. Daniel had answered this question before. He had a routine for it. My mom passed last year. My dad left before that. Something tightened in Junho's chest that he didn't have a name for. Why didn't you stay at the scene? There were reporters you could have. I didn't do it for that. Then why did you come to the hotel? Daniel looked at him steadily. I told you, I wanted to know if he was okay. Junho said nothing. He removed his coat, the dry, expensive charcoal one, and placed it over the boy's shoulders without asking. Daniel looked down at it, then up, like he wasn't sure whether to hand it back. Come with me, Junho said. I don't want trouble. You won't get it. For the first time in a long time, Junho Kang was not giving an order. He was asking. There was a difference, even if he hadn't always known where it was. Daniel looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at the dog. He set the rest of the sandwich down on the ledge where the dog could reach it. Then he followed Junho into the rain. The hotel suite was quiet when they returned. A nurse remained in the corner of the room, present but unobtrusive, hands folded, eyes down. Monitors beeped at slow, measured intervals. Minyu lay against his pillows, still pale, still small, but awake now. His eyes found Daniel the moment the door opened. They widened. That's him, Minyu said. His voice was hoarse from the smoke, but the certainty in it was absolute. Junho looked at his son. You remember. He told me to keep breathing, Minyu swallowed. I could hear him even when I couldn't open my eyes. He kept saying it. Daniel stood near the door with his hands in the front pocket of his hoodie. Junho's coat now draped over the back of a chair. He looked like he was deciding whether to stay or go. He had spent most of the day being told to leave places, and old habits were hard to override. Junho stepped forward. He was not a man who bowed. In his world, the bow was something other people offered him, a gesture of deference he had received so many times it had become invisible. He had stopped registering it years ago. He bowed now. Not the shallow professional nod. A real one, a slow, deliberate drop of the head, the kind that meant something. You saved my son. The room was completely still. I owe you more than I can repay, Junho continued. I also owe you an apology for earlier. Daniel shifted his weight. He was not comfortable with this. He was 12 and he had spent the last year learning to ask for very little and expect even less. And this, a powerful man bowing, apologizing, looking at him directly, was more than he knew what to do with. It's fine, Daniel said. It isn't, Junho said, and I want to be honest about that. Another silence. This one was different from the ones downstairs. Those silences had been about power, about who was dismissed and who was doing the dismissing. This one was about two people standing across from each other without a script. Minyu spoke from the bed. Are you hungry? He asked Daniel. Daniel almost laughed. It came out as something less, a breath, a small exhale that carried something like relief. Yeah, he said, a little. Minyu looked at his father. Can we order food? And just like that, the heaviness in the room shifted. Not disappeared. It was still there underneath everything, a weight that would take time to fully understand. But it shifted, made room. Junho nodded at the nurse, who picked up the phone without a word. Daniel sat down in the chair beside the bed. Minyu asked him his name, then asked him how old he was, then asked whether he'd ever broken a car window before. Daniel said no, that was the first time. Minyu said it sounded hard. Daniel said it actually was. The rock kept bouncing off. Minyu laughed, a thin, raspy sound, and then winced from the effort of it. Junho sat across from them both and watched, and didn't say anything for a long time. He had spent 11 years building a company that operated in 34 countries. He had sat across from presidents, from hedge fund managers, from journalists who wanted to pull him apart and analysts who wanted to reconstruct him into data. He had negotiated in 4 languages and won more rooms than he had lost. He had never once felt as outmatched as he did in that quiet hotel room, watching a homeless 12-year-old make his son laugh for the first time since the crash. Later that night, after Minyu fell back asleep, Junho and Daniel sat in the small seating area near the window. Rain still tracked down the glass in long, slow lines. "Why didn't you stay for a reward?" Junho asked, at the scene. Daniel looked at the rain. It didn't feel like a reward situation. What did it feel like? A pause, an emergency. And after the emergency? Daniel shrugged. After the emergency, it was done. I just wanted to know he made it. Junho turned his glass slowly in his hands. He had been drinking water. He kept forgetting. "That line you just said to me downstairs," Junho said quietly, "about not wanting money, you said it like it was obvious." Daniel looked at him. "It was obvious. To you?" "Yeah. I've spent a long time in rooms where nothing is obvious unless it involves money," Junho said, not bitterly, just accurately. "You forget there are other reasons people do things." Daniel didn't have a response to that. He was 12. He had not yet developed the vocabulary for a conversation about moral fatigue in executive culture. But he understood the shape of what Junho was saying, the way you understand a word you've never been taught because the context makes it clear. "Where will you sleep tonight?" Junho asked. Daniel looked at the window. "I'll find somewhere." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I've got." Junho stood up. "You'll stay here tonight in the adjoining room. That's not a discussion." Daniel looked at him. "I'm not asking because I feel like I have to," Junho said. "I'm asking because my son is in that room and he would sleep better knowing you're nearby, and because you have a cut on your arm that should be looked at properly." Daniel looked down at his forearm. The gauze was coming loose at one end. He thought about arguing. He thought about the principle of it, about not taking things, not owing things, not making himself a problem for anyone. That had been the operating principle since his mother died. Take up less space, need less, expect nothing. But he was tired, and his arm hurt, and the room was warm. "Okay," he said. That was all. 3 weeks later, Daniel was in school. Not the same school he'd been pulled out of 8 months ago when the money ran out, and the apartment went, and everything that had been his mother's became something that had to be sorted and sold and surrendered. A new one. Clean hallways. A locker with a combination he'd memorized on the first day because he had always been good with numbers. He had new shoes, plain, white, the kind that didn't announce themselves. New clothes. A backpack with 3 compartments. He had spent 20 minutes in the store just opening and closing the zippers because he had never owned anything with that many zippers before. A small apartment had been arranged in his name, not flashy, not oversized. A 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building with a working elevator and a super who left a note under the door saying to call if anything needed fixing. Daniel had read the note 4 times. Junho had been clear about what this was. Not charity, not payment, opportunity. He had said it exactly once and not repeated it because he understood from the 3 conversations they had now had that Daniel was the kind of person who needed to be told things once. "I'm not doing this because I owe you," Junho had said. "I'm doing it because you're 12 and you're alone and that shouldn't be true. And because I want to be the kind of man who does something about it when he has the means to." Daniel had stared at him for a moment and then said, "Okay." That had been enough for both of them. Junho visited often, not for publicity, not for the kind of story that gets written up and circulated. He came on Tuesday evenings after his last call and sometimes on Saturday mornings if Minyu didn't have practice. He never brought cameras. He never brought his assistant. He came the way a person comes when they're not trying to be seen coming. Minyu and Daniel had become inseparable in the specific, intense way that only children can be, built on the logic of shared video games, and inside jokes, and a mutual agreement that the other person was interesting. They were different in almost every measurable way. Minyu had grown up with everything. Daniel had grown up learning to survive without it. But Minyu had a curiosity that wasn't yet armored by class, and Daniel had a steadiness that Minu found impossible to rattle. And between those two things, they had found something that worked. One afternoon in the second month, Daniel and Junho sat at the kitchen table while Minu was in the other room. Daniel had homework spread out in front of him. Junho had a coffee going cold at his elbow. "Why are you helping me so much?" Daniel asked. He asked it the way he asked most things, directly, without softening it into something easier to answer. Junho thought about it for a genuine moment, not the half-second pause that precedes a prepared answer, a real one. "Because you reminded me what matters," he said finally. Daniel frowned. "I don't understand that." "I built everything I have around protecting things," Junho said. "Money, reputation, position. I got so good at protecting those things that I stopped noticing I was losing other things, slower, quieter." He turned his coffee cup. "You ran towards something. I've been running away from things for years and calling it success." Daniel thought about this. He was not sure he fully understood it yet, but he filed it away, the way he filed things that were true even when they were too large to immediately use. "I want Minu to grow up brave," Junho said. "Not just successful, not just protected." He looked at Daniel carefully. "Brave like you." Daniel didn't know what to do with that, so he did what he always did when something was too full to speak to. He leaned forward and hugged him. Junho froze. Half a second. The involuntary stiffness of a man who had not been held in a long time and had forgotten how to receive it without treating it as information to be processed. Then he hugged back. He held on longer than he expected to. When it was over, he sat back and didn't say anything and didn't need to. Some things land exactly where they need to land and don't require a word. 6 months later. The youth center opened on a cold Tuesday in March, on a block that had been empty for 4 years. The building was nothing extraordinary from the outside, brick, 3 stories, wide windows that let the light in. But inside, it had been rebuilt from the ground up. A cafeteria that served hot meals 3 times a day, a homework room with enough tables that no one had to double up, a housing support office with a social worker on staff full-time, a small medical clinic staffed 2 days a week, a gym with second-hand equipment that still worked. Not flashy, not a monument, just functional, just a place where a kid who had nowhere to go could go somewhere. They called it the Daniel Foundation. When the reporters showed up for the ribbon cutting and asked Junho Kang why now, why this, why name it after a child, he answered the same way each time without variation, because it was simply true and required no decoration. Because one boy ran toward fire when everyone else ran away. He said it plainly. He did not deliver it as a speech. He did not pause for effect. It ran on every news channel anyway. Across the crowd that morning, Daniel stood near the entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was wearing the same plain white shoes. He had grown a little taller in 6 months, not much, but enough that Minu had pointed it out twice. Minu stood beside him now, shoulder to shoulder, watching the cameras without interest. "Does it feel weird?" Minu asked. "Your name on a building." Daniel looked up at the sign, simple block letters, the Daniel Foundation. "A little," he said. "My dad cried when they put it up," Minu said. "He didn't think I saw. Daniel smiled. When Junho finished with the cameras, he crossed the crowd and came to stand behind the 2 boys. Not in front of them, not beside them, behind. He put a hand briefly on each of their shoulders. The photographers got the shot. They ran it under a dozen different headlines over the following days. Most of them got it wrong in one direction or another. But one caption came close, a small paper local, not widely read. It said simply, "A billionaire steps back." That was it, nothing more. It was close enough. There is a version of this story that gets told at dinner parties, the billionaire who was humbled, the street kid who became a symbol, the touching moment. The foundation named after a boy. That version is not wrong. It just leaves out the pavement, the rain, the door that wouldn't open. The rock swung 3 times before the glass gave. The gauze wrapped around an arm alone in a gas station bathroom. The dog getting the last half of the sandwich. It leaves out the 20 minutes that Jun-Ho Kang stood in the rain. No umbrella, no cameras, no assistant. Walking streets he didn't know, looking in doorways, because a boy had run into fire for his son, and he had sent that boy away without seeing his face. The version told at dinner parties ends with the foundation. The real version ends with 2 boys standing outside a building with a name on it, one who had always had everything, and one who had learned to survive with nothing, deciding, without saying it out loud, that the other one was someone worth knowing. That's the part that matters. Not the money, not the headlines, not even the fire. Just 2 kids, shoulder to shoulder, looking up. Let's be honest. If the boy was well-dressed, would security have treated him the same? The billionaire wasn't the only problem. The crowd laughed. That's worse. Money can buy power, but it can't buy integrity. Some rich people forget that. Everyone talks about injustice, but how many would actually step in?